This is the story of how a mega company used a very simple financial trick to steal $12 billion. Trust me, when I say simple, I mean it. As the company didn't do anything extra or complicated, but still managed to fool the world and pull one of the biggest financial scandals in history. Ladies and gentlemen, the company in question is WorldCom. Or maybe I should say it was WorldCom, because they ceased to exist after they got exposed. From the rise of this promising company to its devastating fall, this video has everything. By the end of this video, you'll know enough about WorldCom and the simple trick they used to steal $12 billion. WorldCom was founded in the 1980s, and just like many other companies, they started small. They were a telecommunication company that provided long-distance services to businesses. But you see, at the time WorldCom entered the market, a strong rival was already waiting, AT&T. AT&T already provided the same amount of service WorldCom provided, and that right there led to the birth of a new rivalry. WorldCom, in an attempt to differentiate itself from its rival and gain market share, came up with the strategy of giving many discounts to its customers. With this strategic move by WorldCom, a very fierce rivalry started. AT&T was not ready to lose its throne in the industry, and WorldCom was hungry to take over. Little did they know that this intense rivalry was setting the stage for a scandal that would shock the world. Although this rivalry forced WorldCom to dig deep and come up with an amazing strategy that'll put and keep them ahead of their competition, in 2002, they did the unexpected. They announced a massive account error, a $3.4 billion void in the account record. But that wasn't the actual figure. After the announcement, a proper investigation followed, and that's when the actual figure was revealed. $11 billion was being hidden. But wait a minute. Before we jump straight into the scandal, say hello to the brain behind everything, Bernie Ebbers. This man had a one-of-a-kind style of leadership, an aggressive style in prioritizing growth and profit over anyone and anything. He wasn't one to sit around and listen to excuses or explanations for bad results. He would set huge financial goals and would stop at nothing to ensure that these goals were met. He relied on fear and intimidation to get things done. Workers who acted out of line or missed the target would be humiliated and face his deadly wrath. This created a difficult working environment for the workers, as they were consistently under huge pressure to deliver and sometimes would have to ignore ethical practices just to please the boss. But you see, not just personality-wise, Ebbers had other reasons to be this ruthless. He was obsessed with the stock price. According to him, the stock price was the only thing that showed the company's success and his effectiveness as a leader. He would do anything to keep the stock price up, even if it meant engaging in illicit financial practices. He over time stopped focusing on long-term goals and repercussions and focused on short-term gains. But we just have to give it to him. This guy's resilience level is out of this world. He's to be praised for WorldCom's rise in competition with AT&T, because normally WorldCom wouldn't even stand a chance. But you see, this insane level of resilience came at a cost. As I said earlier, Ebbers focused on short-term goals. He didn't have the best financial planning or risk management system. But one thing he for sure had was the willingness to cut corners, and that led to a couple of issues. So how did he and WorldCom cut corners? Before we answer that, what are the corners? You see, there's something called Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, GAAP. It's more like a guide that organizations have to follow when creating financial records or reports. Think of the GAAP as a rule book that organizations must follow. And the reason for this rule book in the first place is to ensure an honest and transparent representation of the finances of companies. So yeah, WorldCom, desperately looking for ways to inflate profits, did not follow this rule book. In fact, they violated not just one policy, but a couple. A major violation was to the policy of transparency. The GAAP demands a transparent representation of a company's financial performance. This transparency was missing in WorldCom's reports. They manipulated everything, from inflating assets to writing false expenses. Basically, WorldCom created misleading pictures of their financial health. WorldCom also violated the matching principle. This principle requires that expenses are to match the revenue generated. Once again, WorldCom didn't follow this, and they manipulated their expenses to boost their profit, although artificially creating a false picture of their expenses. But that's not all. In business, there are periods of uncertainty, and the GAAP has a policy of conservative approach for companies in this period. WorldCom once again didn't follow this and still maintained its very aggressive approach, minimizing liabilities and inflating the value of assets to paint an exaggerated picture of its financial stability. Now that we established how WorldCom cut corners, let's dive into the fun part, the accounting trick they used to steal $12 billion. They used the infamous cookie jar scheme. Of course, nobody was eating cookies or anything like that. The jar was actually a metaphor for WorldCom's secret pool of expenses. This jar helped them hide their expenses and inflate their profits for years. So this is how the jar worked. We've already established that WorldCom had aggressive financial targets that were put in place by CEO Bernie Ebbers. They later realized their expenses would become a major obstacle to hitting the target, and what did they do? They found a way to cut their expenses. But this is the thing, expenses are unavoidable. You can't run a business without them. But I guess WorldCom was so desperate that they didn't see the obvious. What's more interesting is the kind of expenses they decided to cut. They went after their line cost, the fees paid that connected phone calls across different networks. Going after this was not all that surprising because that was their biggest expense. In fact, it made up 50% of their total expenses. But you see, they shouldn't have tampered with the line cost because it significantly impacted their profitability. But they did, and this is how they did it. They didn't record and report the line cost accurately as expenses. They parked them. They used 3 tricks to achieve this parking method. One was capitalizing the cost. What they did here was treat and record the costs like investments that'll last for years. This made it look like they had reduced expenses, more profit saved, and more future profits because they had investments. They also used a deferral method. This is not immediately reflecting expenses in their records. With this method, they could on paper push expenses further into the future, thus making their current records look all green and positive. Lastly, they created fake reserves where they claimed they stored money for future expenses, having to do with line costs. Basically, the whole plan was to significantly reduce the line cost on paper for a particular quarter, to have an exaggerated financial report making the company look like a profitable field for investors. But this was the problem with the so-called genius plan. It only provided temporary solutions and, as a matter of fact, simultaneously set the company up for future problems. You see, these hidden costs only went hidden on paper. They only worked to create illusions, but in actual reality, the costs still existed as they had to be paid to keep the company functional. And the more they hid these expenses, the more they'd have to make up for it in the future. But I guess they got blinded by desperation. And of course, sooner or later, the jar will get filled up and there won't be any space left to store expenses. But the need to hide expenses was not the reason for taking shady steps. WorldCom also had AT&T in sight and would do anything to suppress them. AT&T, of course, was not going to make it any easier for them as they kept on growing and maintaining their top spot in the market. This pressure forced Ebbers and WorldCom to go deeper into the rabbit hole of illicit financial practices. At this point, it looked like the fight was just for public image. AT&T consistently showing amazing records, and WorldCom wanted to match that, even if it meant breaking accounting ethics. And trust me, they continued on this path for years until an amazing woman stepped into the scene. Cynthia Cooper. She was the vice president of internal audits, but unlike other executives in the company, she wasn't moved by wealth or any corrupt motive, but by strict ethics. Her primary job in the company as the head of internal audit was to go through the financial records and identify loopholes. And yeah, While performing her normal duties, she started noticing shady documentation. She was bent on getting to the root of the matter, and she swiftly called on her entire audit team to join her in solving the puzzle. She became a detective overnight and started interviewing various staff in the company, and finally, she came to the realization and conviction that fraud was going on. She, without wasting time, called the attention of the executives, but the expected happened. She and all her efforts were met with strong resistance. The executives downplayed her concerns. Even the chief financial officer pressured her into halting her investigation. But she was not ready to take off her detective shoes. She refused to turn a blind eye to the fraud, and in 2002, she officially became a whistleblower when she informed the Security and Exchange Commission, SEC, about the shady practices that were going on in the company. With the SEC involved, the grand investigation began. Interviews were conducted, records were triple-checked, and financial statements were properly scrutinized. It was only a matter of time before WorldCom got properly exposed. And on the 20th of June 2002, it happened incredibly. On the date I mentioned, WorldCom was forced to come clean to the public. The company released a statement that was nothing short of a bombshell. In the statement, the company admitted to a mind-blowing accounting error of $3.9 billion in their financial records. With this announcement, investors got completely heartbroken. But it only got worse. The investigation continued, and the missing $3.9 billion that got everybody all hyped up and overwhelmed now looked like child's play, as the investigation later showed that the actual amount was $11 billion. The entire financial world just couldn't believe this. The once mighty giant is now mopping the floor. Although the whole financial world felt this, no one felt it like the investors did. They fell for WorldCom's deceit and invested all they had in it. Immediately after the news broke, the stock price fell drastically, and investors rushed to sell their shares because they didn't want to lose more than they had already lost. But the investors just didn't stay away from WorldCom. Other telecommunication companies felt it as they now started to get perceived in a negative light, but over time, these affected companies regained the trust of the investors. But before the trust was regained, the financial industry had to implement stricter measures to put organizations in check and ensure transparency and ethical conduct. But wait a minute, the story doesn't end there. The legal system now took over. Bernie Ebbers and other top WorldCom executives now had to pay the price for the loss and heartbreak they caused investors. For the main man, Bernie Ebbers, after getting charged with fraud by the SEC, faced trial, caught the attention of the whole financial industry. In 2005, after a very lengthy trial, was charged, found guilty of 9 counts of securities fraud and conspiracy, and sentenced to a heart-crushing 25 years imprisonment. The sentence was later reduced to 13 years after appeal. He was released in 2019 due to health concerns and died on the 2nd of February 2020. Other top executives got their share of punishment after they pleaded guilty, but none was as epic as Ebbers. But not just individuals. The company as a corporate body also faced the wrath of the law. They faced numerous lawsuits from investors who had lost money to them due to the scandal. The lawsuit claimed that the company used deceitful statements to manipulate the investors into investing. In the end, settlement was reached and WorldCom had to pay billions of dollars to compensate the investors. WorldCom did not remain the same after this. After their bankruptcy, they got reconstructed and rebranded as MCI. Things went from bad to worse as just 1 year after the arrest of Bernie Ebbers, the company got acquired by Verizon, and just like that, the official end of WorldCom. The video has finally come to an end, and of course, don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it. Also, let me know in the comments if you think you can spot another fraud like WorldCom, unlike the big money investors who couldn't, and in the end had to pay dearly. Also, don't forget to smash the subscribe button if you aren't already subscribed to the channel. And yeah, you might want to hit that notification bell as we have more amazing videos like this coming. Enjoy your day. I'll catch you in the next video.